Hello everybody, what's going on? This is Andrew, and today I am going to share some of the decks I've built for when Dominaria United comes out. These are all standard decks, rotations happening, it's exciting, cards are leaving the format, new cards are coming into the format, and when that happens, it's always a good idea to reevaluate what decks exist, and I talked a little bit about that in my last video. Today I'm going to be sharing 6 new decks that I've built. They're all tribal decks, so 6 tribal decks, all using some of the new cards. Sometimes they're based entirely around some of the new cards, sometimes they're just parts of it that are complementing older versions of decks. But I'm going to talk about these 6 tribal decks I built, talk about why I built them, and just kind of go from there. So this first deck that I wanted to show off is a mono blue deck. If you know me, you'll know that I love playing mono blue or tempo-y style decks if I can. So I was looking through some of the cards and I noticed this card, Combat Research, which is kind of like Curious Obsession, which was one of the main reasons that mono blue deck from a few years ago was able to be successful in Standard. So, Combat Research, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If it's legendary, it also gets +1/+1 and has Ward 1, which makes it harder to kill, which means you can keep attacking and keep drawing cards. So these mono blue decks, you need to have enough cheap evasive threats to put this thing on, and then you need to be able to protect it, and then you need to be able to actually win the game quickly. So, what I put together was a bunch of cheap evasive threats. Lantern Bearers, Pixie, Illusionist is the one I chose here because if you draw this later on in the game, it can actually be bigger and do stuff. I don't know if it's better or worse than some of the other one-drop flyers. There's a couple options here, but I wanted to try Pixie Illusionist because I want to play Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief in this deck. So we're not quite mono blue anymore. We're splashing green for Ivy, which is pretty easy to do since we've got access to Dreamroot Cascade and Yavimaya Coast, and we're playing 4 Considers anyways. Splashing green just for Ivy, and one other card that I'll get to in a little bit, is pretty easy to do. So Ivy says, whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy, I may copy that spell and put a copy targeting Ivy. So that means I can copy Combat Research. So I go turn 1 Lantern Bearer, turn 2 Ivy, turn 3 Combat Research, targeting Lantern Bearer, also target Ivy, hold up a counterspell. Now I've got a 1/1 flyer that draws me a card. I've got a 3/2 flyer with Ward 1 that draws me a card. And I'm just off to the races. I think Ivy's a really cool addition to this deck. And so since I'm playing Ivy, I wanted to make sure that the deck had plenty of spells that target my stuff that I want to be casting. So Lantern Bearer and Mischievous Catgeist help out with that. But then there's also this card, Winterthorn Blessing. I always think it's just Winterhorn Blessing. I always forget the T. Winterthorn Blessing from Midnight Hunt. Puts a counter on one target creature you control, and then you tap, you freeze something. You tap, and it doesn't untap one of your opponent's creatures, and it has flashback. I think this card, just as a 2-of, just to help you push through damage and make your board a little bit bigger to win the game, I think it could be really, really cool with Ivy, because you get to copy it. So you get the effect twice. You get to put a counter on one of your things, and put a counter on Ivy, and tap down 2 of their things, right? It's a pretty cool effect. We've got some other cards here. Make disappear some Geistlight Snares, because some of these things are spirits. Fading Hope, slip out the back, just cards that we need to try in this deck. I don't know what's great and what's not, but that's what I was looking at. And then Haughty Djinn, the new Tempest Djinn, basically. It's a 3-mana or star 4. Its power is equal to the number of instant and sorceries in your graveyard, and then instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. We don't really take advantage of that second ability too much. It does make our Geistlight Snare and our flashbacked Winterthorn Blessing that much better. And then 20 lands. I think this deck could be pretty good. I think it looks pretty good on paper. We'd have to see how it plays and what other decks are going on in the format. But I love decks like this, and I think that this version of this deck has a lot going for it. I've got this Vidalian Mindslinger over here in the sideboard, I think it's important to remember that this card exists. It's a control magic type effect where it comes into play, you steal one of their things, but if you pay the kicker, so if you pay 5 mana, it's a 4/4, and then you can steal a bigger thing. I think that this card's going to be pretty important in the sideboard of blue decks like this, so I just wanted to leave it over here to show that, you know, I know that this exists, and I think it goes in the sideboard here. So that's the mono blue deck. I'm going to move now to this Simic deck that I came up with. As I was looking through all these cards, you know, I realized how important Geistlight Snare was, Lantern Bearer, Mischievous Catgeist, and then I started looking and I realized all of these cards I want to play are spirits, other than Ivy. So if I take Ivy away and add back in the spirits package and the enchantment package, I get a deck that looks like this, and I think it looks pretty cool. Generous Visitor and Kami of Transience trigger off of whenever an enchantment spell enters the battlefield or whenever you cast an enchantment spell. It doesn't specify auras. Previously, we'd played these cards with auras because they were easy to find. Here, the general enchantments are much easier to find. Lantern Bearer and Catgeist are enchantments on the backside. These Ghost Shintais are enchantment spells, obviously, that grow. Ghost Shintai of Lost Wisdom and the other one are both legendary creatures, so they go pretty good with combat research. Geistlight Snare, just one Ghost Shintai turns Geistlight Snare into a 1-mana spell. I think there's something cooking here. I don't know if this is exactly the right way to build this deck, but you can make your creatures pretty big pretty fast. You've got some staying power because your cards have Disturb, and these Ghost Shintais get bigger and bigger as the game goes on. I think this deck's probably missing something to help it go way over the top in case you get swept or something. Or not. You know, sometimes you play decks like this and you're just like, well, I'm going to put my stuff on the table and hope it's good enough. And if it's not, then I just lose this game. And playing, you know, aggressive decks like that early on in the format, I think is really important. You need to figure out what the breaking point is, right? Can you do this thing consistently enough or not? If not, it's time to either scrap the deck or move on to something that's a little grindier. But if you can do the thing early on, then you should keep doing the thing early on and just ride that for as long as you can until the format adapts. Is this the thing that you want to be doing? I don't know. I think it's sweet. I think it looks pretty good, but I don't know if it's going to be perfect. I'm definitely going to give it a shot because it's not going to use that many of my wild cards to make this deck early on. So this could be a good deck to start in the format, and then, you know, move on to other things as we build up our collections. But I think this deck looks sweet. I like the idea of combining the spirits that care about enchantments with some of the enchantments from the new set, especially combat research, and trying out the Ghost Shintais here kind of makes sense to me. So this is my Simic Spirits build. Again, we've got the Vidalian Mindslinger, probably important in the sideboard. Yeah, that's this deck. And I really hope you all like green-blue decks because I've got another one here for you. This one's white, splashing green and blue, but it's still a Bant deck. There's a lot of new tribal stuff coming from the new set. Those other two decks were kind of supplemented with stuff from the new set, but they were mostly decks that existed beforehand. This is a deck that I'm building due to some cards in the new set. Specifically Valiant Veteran here, which is the Soldier Lord, 2-mana 2/2, other soldiers get +1/+1. You can exile it from your graveyard for 5 mana and put a counter on each soldier you control. It's a cool card. So what do we do with it? Are there enough soldiers to make a really low to the ground mono white deck? And the answer was no. I tried, I looked for it, I couldn't really figure out how to make a small ball mono white weenie deck that played Valiant Veteran. It didn't really feel like it worked. So instead, I looked at soldiers, and a lot of the soldiers were bigger creatures. Well, these kind of bigger Bant decks can be pretty successful depending on how this format looks. I also noticed that most of these cards are humans. Not all of them, but most of them. So can we do something cool with Catilda Dawnheart Prime, with Valiant Veteran, with King Darien the whatever? And can we kind of put this all together into a box that works? I think this kind of works. We've got Resolute Reinforcements, which is the raise the alarm at instant speed, basically, but it's a creature, so you can play it with Thalia. We've got Brutal Cathar as your creature removal spell. I'm playing 3 copies of Metropolis Angel here, which is a 4-mana 3/1 flyer for 4 mana, kind of expensive, but whenever you attack with one or more creatures with counters on them, you get to draw a card. And so since this deck is putting +1/+1 counters on creatures in a couple different ways, I think having a couple of copies of Metropolis Angel on the top end to help you gas back up makes sense, along with some Ajani Sleeper Agents on the top end to help you gas back up. Ajani Sleeper Agent can draw you creatures or planeswalkers or scry lands away later on in the game, and can pump your team if that's what you need. I think it's a pretty good card for a deck like this. And then the only other non-creature spell I'm playing in the main deck are 4 copies of Protect the Negotiators, which is a counter spell for how many creatures you have on the battlefield, and if you kick it, you get another creature, and the creature does just happen to be a soldier. So I think this deck kind of works pretty well as a bigger Bant deck. I don't, you've got some things to worry about, but I think this deck looks pretty good. You've got stuff to do later on in the game with Catilda, the Disturb on Denic Pious Apprentice, which would help you go late also, because the backside of that card, you investigate whenever a creature dies. So you've kind of got some sweeper proof stuff in that and in King Darien. You've got Protect the Negotiators to help you deal with like a Farewell from control decks. Brutal Cathar takes care of creatures. And then Ajani helps you go longer in the game. I think there's something here. I don't know if it would work out in practice because you don't have a really good 1-drop. It's kind of okay the way I built the mana base in this deck. You can play a tap land on turn 1, right? We're playing all 4 Spars Headquarters. So tap land on 1, untap land on 2, and then hopefully Overgrown Farmland or Deserted Beach on 3. Then you've got, your mana is set up for the rest of the game. But it is tricky. It's a more mid-rangey Bant deck. It could be good, but I couldn't find a mono white, like a white weenie deck that I liked, so I came up with this instead. And I think it's good. All these cards look good, but I don't know how good it plays in practice, We'll have to wait and see. So now moving on from the colors we've talked about already. We've talked about green, white, and blue quite a bit. We're moving on to Rakdos Dragons. So we're on Dominaria again. Dragons are cool. There's a lot of dragons here. And Rivaz of the Claw here is a card I really want to talk about. It's the 3-mana, 3/3 menace, but it can tap to add 2 mana in any combination of colors to cast dragon spells. And you can cast a dragon a turn from your graveyard. It's a pretty powerful card, pretty cool ability. It can attack when it needs to. It can just be a mana dork to cast more dragons when you need it to be. So can we put some of these new dragons into a mid-range deck that I think people are already seeing that a mid-range deck like this could be really good? So we've got the classic Blood Tithe Harvester, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Infernal Grasp, Meat Hook Massacre thing going on here. But then we've also got Shivan Devastator, a red X Dragon Hydra. Flying haste, it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. Seems like a pretty good thing to power out with Rivaz. And then we've got 4 copies of Junji the Midnight Sky. When Junji the Midnight Sky dies, it's a 5/5 flying menace for 5. When it dies, you either mind rot your opponent and they lose 2 life, or you bring a non-dragon creature back onto the battlefield. So this lets you reuse your Blood Tithe Harvesters, it lets you get your Rivazes back, so then you can recast your Junjis. I think it's a really cool combination there, and I really like how Junji and Rivaz play together. And then the rest of the deck is just a mid-range deck. Like I said, Meat Hook Massacre. We've got Liliana of the Veil in Standard, obviously, so we have to play her if we're putting together a black-red mid-range deck. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is always going to be good in decks like this. And then a couple copies of Cruelty of Gix. This is a saga with a read ahead, the new mechanic, so you can start wherever you want. You can start at the first, the second, or the third chapter. The first chapter, you Look at your opponent's hand, and you take a creature or planeswalker from it. Second, you tutor for something. Third, you reanimate something. So in this deck, you can just get back your Junji, you can get back your Rivaz, but it's just like a nice value piece here at the top end to go along with your dragons. I don't know if it's going to be great, but I think it's worth trying out. And I like it in a build like this. Just red-black mid-range with a little dragons sprinkled in. I think this deck could be really good. Okay, we did the boring dragon deck. That dragon deck was pretty straightforward. Let's do the fun dragon deck, which is this 4-color abomination that I put together. Still leaning on Rivaz and Junji to do things, but then I added Llanowar Loam Speaker, which is the 2-mana 1/3 mana dork. It has another ability. I don't really care about that ability. I just want a mana dork for any color of mana, because I want to play Rith, Liberated Primeval. A 5-mana 5/5 flying ward 2. Other dragons have ward 2. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature or planeswalker an opponent controlled was dealt excess damage, so that means you hit a 2 toughness creature with a 3 power or a 3 damage removal spell, or they had to chump block, you get a 4/4. It's a really powerful ability. So in this deck, we've got Abrades and Strangles to help turn that on, but really we're just going to be attacking with our stuff and hoping that they have to chump block. Since we're playing 4 colors here, we can afford to play some of the powerful domain cards, like Drag to the Bottom and Leyline Binding. So my idea with this deck is, if we can power out and just kind of do the thing, right? Play a mana dork and then play a dragon. We'll try to do that. If not, we can transition to the slower mid-range deck where we kill their stuff, we sweep the board, and then we come back and do the dragon thing. That's kind of the way I built the deck. 3 copies of Leyline Binding here. This is the cast out that costs less for each basic, or for each land type you control. So it's a 6-drop, but once you have 1 land type, it's a 3-drop, and then if you have all 4, it's a 2-drop. Abrades, Strangles, Fable. I think there's something here also. I don't know if I put this deck together correctly. I don't know if this deck would actually do anything. But again, no 1-drops in the deck other than Strangle. So tap land on turn 1, hopefully an untap land on turn 2. And then we can use our Haunted Ridges and our Deathcap Glades as untapped lands for the rest of the game. And really just take advantage of the power here while leaning into the synergies as much as we can. So that's this deck. I think it's kind of fun. I don't know if it's any good, but I did want to show it off because I'm showing off some of the domain stuff here also. So then the last deck that I came up with was the Cleric deck. Yeah, Clerics is the black supported tribe here. Not zombies, not skeletons, Clerics. So Shadowrite Priest here is a 2-mana 2/2. Other Clerics get +1/+1. You can pay 5 mana, tap it, and sacrifice another Cleric to search for a black creature card and put it onto the battlefield. Okay, that's kind of cool. Are there any amazing black creatures to go get? Not really, no. But this is what I came up with. So we've got a bunch of cheap dorks. We've got Chaplain of Alms, some Allenbach Escorts, Lunarch Veteran. We've got Voice of the Blessed, who is a Cleric. So we're kind of leaning into the Soul Sisters thing to get Voice of the Blessed going. We've got Evolved Sleeper, which is the newest version of the Kithkin, Figure of Destiny. So it's a 1/1, it grows to a 2/2 human cleric, then it grows to a death-touching Phyrexian human cleric, and then if it's Phyrexian, you can put a counter on it to draw a card and lose a life. I think this card's really powerful, and I'd like to play with it here. So a bunch of 1-drops. That works with the Lord, it works with the Soul Sisters thing, and it works with one of the main ways I want to win, which is with Meathook Massacre. So again, Meathook Massacre, we should all know what this card does by now, but if you don't, when it enters the battlefield, it gives each creature -X/-X. When a creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and whenever a creature they control dies, I gain a life. So with Meathook Massacre, we can basically kill off all of our little dorks once they've done everything they need to do to drain our opponent out. We can kill their stuff to grow our Voice of the Blessed. And with Aaron, Benalia's Ruin, which is a 3-mana 3/3, he sacrifices creatures to put a counter on each other creature we control. So again, it's finding value in these little dorks that have kind of outlived their usefulness. And all of this goes really well with Lisa, Forgotten Archangel. She is not a cleric, but she is a 5-mana 4/5 flying lifelinker that says, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return the card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step, and if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it. So, with Lisa, whenever one of our things dies, we get to pick it up again. So we've got all these little dorks hanging out on the battlefield because we've played them, and we've grown our Voice of the Blessed. Maybe it survived, maybe it didn't, but we have all these dorks left over. If we can land a Lisa, or Shadowrite Priest for Lisa on the end step, untap, and then Meathook Massacre to clear the board, but pick up all of the dorks again, that's a really, really cool line and a really cool strategy that I want to see if it works. And then again, we've got Anointed Peacekeeper, which is, PV at home. It's not as good as Elite Spellbinder, but it fills a similar role. It's a 3-drop. It's got a big body. Sometimes it'll be good enough. Sometimes it'll slow your opponent down enough. It just kind of helps glue the rest of this deck together. But yeah, Lisa with Meathook Massacre with all these 1-drops, I think is a really, really cool idea. And I really want to try it and see if it works as well as I hope it does. So win conditions like Meathook Massacre, Voice of the Blessed, Evolve Sleeper, or Aaron getting your stuff big. I think this deck's cool. I'm not sure how else I would build Clerics given what's left in Standard, but I really like where I landed here. I think this deck is sweet. I struggled with this deck a little bit. I was like, how do I make this work? What's going on here? And then realized that just Shadowrite Priesting for Lisa end step is probably the best you can do. You can get big dorks, but none of them really do anything. They're just big. So I think something like this is maybe a little cleaner. No sideboards for these decks yet, because I don't sideboarding. You sideboard when you know what the format is, when you know what to expect. So for all of these decks, I would just put in like 5 or 6 cards that you want for control, so you can take your removal out, and then like some anti-aggro cards. But since you don't really know the specifics of what's going to be in the format, it's really hard to build a sideboard, or a super tuned sideboard, I should say. So like this deck, I'm gonna put like some Duresses, some Mind Rot effects, some extra removal, and then maybe some Planeswalker or something to help me go long. And that's gonna be the deck, or that's gonna be the sideboard, right? It's not super tuned, or I'm not spending a lot of time on it right now. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall, and then we'll see what sticks when the dust settles a little bit. And that is going to be it for me for today. These are the 6 tribal decks I've come up with so far. I'm going to keep working on other decks, and I'm excited to get my hands on these new cards. I want to draft a lot of this set. I want to play some of these decks in Standard and see how they do. Rotation. It's the best time of the year. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Love getting the new cards and playing the powered down 5-set Standard right when rotation happens. I think it's awesome. So I'm excited. Thursday is when these cards release on Arena. I will be there battling with all of you. I hope you enjoyed these brews also. I think they're kind of fun. Let me know what you've been brewing up. It's always good to share ideas like this. So that being said, I'm done for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you next time.